Time for VUC. In our 11th year, with us on our journey this year, Simwood.com. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco. Greenfield Tech. Go to greenfield.tech and see how they can make your tech dreams both feasible and affordable. Our conference bridge is the best you'll ever find. zipdx.com. VUC.me is hosted on Bluehost. And our worldwide local rate dial-ins are provided by voxphone.com. VUC.me is hosted on Bluehost. Wow, somebody's bringing in some off-time audio. But anyway, this is VUC667 for October 13th, Friday the 13th, 2017. To serve woman or man, all kinds of servers on your LAN. I just moved, and I have a little bit more flesh on my bones than I did when that photo was taken. So I have gained a little weight. Here I am. I am going to be talking about an experiment I did that seems to have worked well, which is my media server. My ISP has a media server that died during our move, not because it got hit. It started by working, and then it was off, and then one day it wouldn't go back on. However, a long story about having fiber and that working. We've changed ISPs. So I needed a media server because they don't offer one. They offer TV. I don't want TV. I want my own local server. I have files I want to watch and so on. So we're going to go through that. But before we do, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panel, starting with Michael Graves, who never gets introduced first.
Well, I don't know why that is, but here I am. Hello, welcome. And
well, you are the longest tenured serving is the keynote for today.
He's due for parole fairly soon, though, I think.
That's true. He will be getting out. And I guess if we're going to take it in order of tenure, it would be Mr. Andy Smith next.
Yeah, it would. Good afternoon.
Glad you could join us, Mr. Smith. And, of course, Corrado Mela, who's in the wonderful Scotland.
Yep, in Perth in Scotland. Good evening, everyone. Afternoon. Good morning. Everywhere you are.
Whatever it is for you. Okay. Anyway, so we are live, of course. If you're watching this, you are probably on live.vuc.me. Okay, I'm going to get right into this, and then we're going to be talking to everybody else who has different kinds of servers, because we want to talk about NAS, network stuff, backups, all the kinds of other things, less frivolous applications. But before we do, let me share this screen and just show you briefly what I'm doing. And if anybody has any questions, get on IRC on freenode.net. We've been doing this for so long, I've forgotten all this, but it's freenode.net, and it's the VUC room. And now remembering how to share the application window. Any second, we're going to have it. Oh, where is it? I don't see it. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I went online and looked for different products. Present to everyone. Everybody can see this, right? Yes.
Yes.
So this is the box that I ended up buying. And of course, the guys that you're seeing now were trying to get me to buy the other thing that was way more expensive by NVIDIA, right, Corrado? But anyway, I said, well, let me take a chance with this thing. So what we're looking at here is the X9T. You can look at the Amazon listing, by the way, by going to vuc.me/box. And if perchance you buy one at a 30 or 40% reduction, we probably get 50 cents off that deal. So go ahead and take a look at it and keep that cookie in and buy other stuff. We'll still get a little percentage. Anyway, this is on the left, you see the X9T, which is the little unit. It's a little bit, it's about the length of a cigarette pack, only if that was square. You see it with relation to the mouse. I bought a cheap mouse, a cheap USB mouse. I found that I immediately had to buy a USB hub because there's two USB ports on the unit. And by the way, my only complaint physically of this unit, I think it's a beautifully done thing. The USB are upside down and they're a tiny bit too close to each other, which means that you always wonder whether one of them isn't going to break when you put the second one in. So you see the USB hub. You see that it has a couple of 64 gig thumb drives in it. How long has it been since we've called them thumb drives? I don't know, USB drives. And a 32 gig, which has the entire, a half of the whole West Wing 7 seasons on it. And then the remote control, which happens to be upside down, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of the proportion. This is what, oops, wrong order. This is what the home screen will look like. So you've got online video, you've got a place to put, this is Android 6, by the way. You've got YouTube, there's Google Play Store, you can put apps and so on. And it's really kind of a funny situation. I've never had an Android TV, so it's a little strange for me. I honestly don't know what memory recycle means, but when it finishes, it says that it recovered 370 gigs or megs or something. So it must mean it's some kind of garbage collection. You see the apps and the settings and so on, browser. Okay, the one I've used the most would be the file, either the file browser because of all those local USB keys, or the bottom row, Netflix and so on. When we get back to this one, there is an application built in that does all kinds of free streaming. And so you can see all the news outlets. I see CNBC, NBC, Fox 43, Fox News Channel, CNBC, you know, and there's the French, there's all the languages that you would expect. That works pretty well. A couple of them aren't great quality, but it isn't my bandwidth. It's just something that they're doing that doesn't seem to be spectacular. You don't see CNN, but CNN and all the rest, Sky TV, they're all here. Apparently everybody, I don't know if, Michael, if you know anything about that or any of you, but apparently almost all TV now does their own streams. You know, TV that you would watch free, right?
Yeah,
so
everything that is on Freeview or FreeSat or everything, you can easily watch them online, yes.
Right, and I'm trying to remember, I don't recall seeing the BBC, by the way, on this, but probably there's a way, or maybe they're protected by iPlayer. Let's look at this.
I'm sure that you might be, you can find BBC World streaming online, not the BBC News channels for the UK. They're probably protected, but BBC World is streaming from their website, and probably you can pick them up.
Isn't anything that requires iPlayer also protected?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, geographically, yeah, bound to the IP address, yeah. And there's a lot of people in the Isle of Man and the Isle of Jersey that are royally with the BBC because they don't have an IP address that is UK, and they cannot see the BBC online.
Are they paying the license fee on those places?
Probably not. Well,
there you go. I've never been angry with the BBC for that reason, because their model is, I mean, I don't even know. How much does that cost? Andy, do you know?
Yeah.
Or Corrado?
150 quid a year.
Yeah, paid monthly.
That's not that big a deal, is it?
I would pay that. I would happily pay that to get commercial free.
Yeah, the problem is that is not something you pay to see the BBC. Is a tax you have to pay if you have a television, irrespective or not if you watch the BBC or not, even if you don't watch the BBC and you specifically don't want to. Yeah. And
that's true, by the way, that's true here too. Let me find this last slide so we can get off of this. Yeah, here's the specs on this thing, and apparently it was quite a bit more. In fact, the deal in France was way more dramatic. But I thought for $65, so there's you know, it's Android 6 TV box. It says 4K. Our TV is like 720p, so I'll never know what 4K looks like or whether it even works on this box, but they claim it does. And it also says that it decodes 265, which I'm not 100% sure of. I'll have to try it. Michael, you were saying?
Now, when it comes to 4K, I have some things I can add because of something that happened this past week.
Yeah, we should definitely mention that. Although, in the context, you really have to be looking at something that's worth looking at in 4K. Same comment for 360 degrees. I mean, it's really artificial, the things that have been done, but someday that will all come together. So
one of the things about the spec sheet you just put up there, could you put it back a sec?
Probably could.
Which was the Wi-Fi connectivity.
Just a second, I will find
which I
it.
think it said 2.4 gigs. Which is
yeah,
okay.
It is I'm trying to find where's the...
Well, wouldn't 2.4 gigs, a standard 2.4 gig connection, not be sufficiently fast for a 4K?
No, because 4K only requires, using H.264, it only requires about 30 megabits. So 30 megabits is not that bad.
Okay.
Wait, the 2.4G, that's the frequency, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not I mean, there's 2.4 and what, 5 or something?
Yeah,
yes.
5 gigahertz. The bandwidth is much better.
Okay.
But you could use 2.4 in multi-channel if your router supports it. So you probably can get a good bandwidth. But 30 megabits per second is pushing the 2.4G, in my experience, especially if you're not very close to the router.
And also, if you've got somebody else or various other devices sat on there that are actually doing anything very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember that the router will always fall back to the lowest speed of the slowest devices.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, a couple of things I found out about this. We're not going to go on and on about it. I just want to mention it because we're talking about servers, and I had to experience all these different things and try to figure it out. So one of the things you need to know if you're using one of these and you're new with it is that, at least in this case, it has to be FAT32 formatted.
Yeah.
I had some drives I didn't understand why they weren't working. Of course, I have a Mac, so some of them were Mac OS, and that's obviously not going to work.
HFC.
But I guess for Linux, this is not extended FAT. This is FAT32. Anyway, still it goes up to 64 gigs, so that's fine. The other thing, there's some funny modes. So there's zero documentation, by the way. None. You'll have to go online. I mean, yeah, there's like a 3-page thing saying, here, plug this into this, plug this into that. That part you knew already. But once you get to it, there's a very weird select mode. So I started playing around, and I was getting this thing where it was just making check boxes and not opening the files. And I realized that, in fact, there's a toggle to go between a mode where you're checking boxes, checking files to delete or copy or whatever, and then you got to go toggle out of that mode to actually play them. The player works fine. You can add. I didn't do this, but you can actually add anything that you want in Android, and most of it probably will work if it works on 6, and that would include I think one of the finest applications ever written for Android, which is MX Player. MX Player just will do anything. You familiar with it, Corrado?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, so the interface, see if you agree with me, the program is really brilliantly done. I mean, I use it on the train all the time, and every little gesture, everything that they've done with the interface is excellent. If you do whatever this is called, a drag on the left, it's the brightness. On the right, it's the volume.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, they really have I've never had a better user experience on that program, and I bought it very quickly. It's a nice thing. It's free if you want to put up with ads, but I thought they did such a great job that I definitely bought it immediately. I also
One question I have for you, Randy, because that's an Android interface, would it work with a touch screen as the output?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. By the way, another caveat I wanted to mention is that you're going to have to use a mouse, and if you're going to be logging in and doing a lot of if you need to enter a lot of things, it's extremely laborious if you need to type anything in. So if you're going to be doing like YouTube searches, yeah, you can do it with the mouse. But with no mouse, a lot of stuff won't be tenable at all. Because I don't even think there's a way to get to the part where you have a keyboard with no mouse. So, a mouse is cheap these days. I bought the cheapest one. I think it was like $5 or less in a supermarket, and it works fine. But once you've got that, Netflix.
One thing you could buy is probably a small keyboard and trackpad.
Yes.
Possibly works, and is a $5 on Amazon.
That's a good point. And also, the thing has Bluetooth, so I haven't tried it, but I guess you could also use. I think it's got. Wait a minute, now that I think of it, it doesn't say it there, but I'm pretty sure it does have Bluetooth. Another interesting point, and then we'll leave it there because unless there's any questions, pretty much said my piece. There's also a Wi-Fi hotspot built into it, and this is how, as far as I know, this is the only way you can talk to it to upload files to the local storage, because there's 16 gigs. I guess maybe 14 of them are available, depending on how many apps you've got. But the point is, you got at least 10 to 12 to 14 gigs for local files. So if you're watching stuff, you want to upload them. And the only way that I know of to do that was through the ES File Explorer, which is, by the way, another program that you can buy, or there's a free version, of course, with ads. And that thing will instantiate FTP server on an IP that they display and so on. It's all, black magic to me, but it did work and I got it working. So I'm really thrilled, really happy with it. It works at least as well as our old box. The only difference is the old box had 250 gigs. I guess if you put 4 64 gigs, you could get 256. Well, that would be the same, actually. But, pretty laborious, though.
You just need an array of thumb drives.
Yeah, exactly.
So a question about storage on these things, particularly when we're looking at the 4K side of things. How big is H.264 or H.265 encoded? I really don't care which. 4K film of like an hour and 50 minutes. How many gigs is that?
Michael may know the answer. I can tell you that for 480p, so how many times more is it? It's generally about 330 megs for a 42-minute, which is an hour TV series. Michael, what do you know about the file sizes?
I'm just looking at it now. How many gigs did you say?
In the local storage?
In the 480p.
Oh, in 480p, it's about 330 megs for 42 minutes, which is an hour TV shows without ads.
We're looking at I'm just looking at this, which took me to a Reddit thread. Presuming that it's H.264, because H.265 is not quite so available yet.
But it is more compressed, right?
Something on the order of 36 gigs.
36 gigs for an hour?
For a movie, so 90 minutes to 2 hours. H.265 halves that. It achieves comparable data quality or image quality in half the data rate. And one of the things that we have to bear in mind with respect to this stuff is once you leave the 1080 realm, because you're storing progressive frames, and that also impacts the data rate, but it makes for a better quality experience. To which there was a first on Tuesday, and that is the guys who do VMix, the production software that I admire, did what was probably the world's first live 4K streaming show from a single computer, as opposed to 4K streaming sports, which has been done from a multi-million-dollar remote production vehicle. So that was kind of interesting. I put the link to the YouTube feed in the chat. I will say their local recording, the 4K, they did a live stream. The live stream was at 30 megabits per second, and that was determined by their upload bandwidth. They're down in Gold Coast in Australia. And they only had 20 megabits of upload, and they didn't feel they had to stay within 13 megabits. They recommend that people, if you're going to do 4K, stream at between 35 to 50 megabits. And their uploaded video was 75 megabits. So a 40-minute show was 16 gig. But that was 4K P60, and that's also the unusual thing. Almost all the 4K around right now is P30, This was 4K P60. Not that their two talking heads merited that in any stretch, but just to prove that it could be done.
Sounds more like FOP to me. FOP, future of porn.
Oh,
you know what? I actually don't think so. I think the future of porn lies down the VR route. But
yeah.
I'm writing a book about that, as a matter of fact. Not about that, but it appears in this part of the book. All right. Well, anyway, I was trying to think there was another, the other caveat, yes, which was, and I don't know if there's a way to fix this, but occasionally I had files that had Dolby sound, and it apparently does not decode it, or at least I haven't figured out how to tell it to do it. Now, my TV doesn't do Dolby, so that could be also a hint. But I'm not sure if there's a way around that. Of course, re-encoding fixes the problem. But do you want to re-encode? I don't know. I'm just not sure about that. If anybody knows anything about that, in other words, you got one of these boxes, Android TV type box, and the sound is Dolby. If there's a way to work around to tell it, oh, I don't want Dolby, then let me know, because I'm interested. Otherwise, I'm going to have to try to recode some of these, re-encode some of the files. Let's move on to other stuff, unless anybody has any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you, by the way. And there's a whole bunch of...
I have one. You have only local connected storage directly to the USB.
Well, there's the streaming of news, and all free streams are available on that program, which I've forgotten the name of, the app, like Movido or something.
Yeah, but does that device also... is also that device able to access a DLNA server on the network? So it's a DLNA client.
You know, you mentioned, we were talking about it earlier privately the other day, and you mentioned that, and I don't know the answer to that. I wish somebody would come in with it, because the old server, let me think about this. So on our free box, if you went in through the web interface, which there isn't one on this that I know of, you were looking at their TV thing, and their TV stream I'm getting things confused here. Let me pedal back for a second. If I brought up VLC LAN, right? VLC, the player.
Video LAN VLC.
It does look for those things, right? It looks for all those streams, and it did find the stream from the media player, which had all the TV channels. That's kind of the opposite of what you're asking, though, right?
Yes, yes. But if you have a media server, basically, that is using the DLNA standard, it's indexing like an MP3 has all those extra details that are recorded in the headers. And you can scroll through and search between things. The same thing does the DLNA server. And you have a DLNA client, because that's an Android-based device. You can probably load any DLNA client application from the Google Store or the Play Store and use it as a DLNA player, a DLNA client. So if you have a DLNA server that, I don't know, a NAS like a Slingbox or something like that, you could possibly look from that, watch from that device the content of another that is on a server, probably.
Well, this thing purportedly does work with Slingbox. You can see Sling in their logo there.
Yes.
I don't know that that means that it'll do what you're asking about.
It's very probable that it does. It's a very common protocol, and there are no royalties on the protocol, so you can implement that whichever way you like.
In fact, it works with HBO, Sling, Netflix, Yup TV, which I've never heard of, Skype. I don't see what the Skype logo is doing here, but I guess if you Skype. Well, I guess you can put the app. I never.
Yeah, and it can connect.
Far be it from me. Far be it from me. Right. Far be it from me for wanting to put the Skype app. Here's the nice little box. Yes. I love these non-English speaking slogan. Open the smart life era. Yeah, that's like something on a t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
The smart life era. That sounds vaguely Samsungian, in fact, to me. And also, here's the answer to a question that I was about to ask Michael. What do you call 4K? They call it UHD. 3840 by 2160, right?
Yeah, 4K is sort of a misnomer, because 4K would be 4096 by something slightly higher than
Right.
21. But the only thing is, the only thing that actually uses 4096 is that's a digital cinema standard. In the consumer realm, you don't see any of that, and so all of the projectors, all of the TVs, very few of them actually resolve 4096.
Again, I mean, this is so far beyond what most of us need, especially for watching TV. Let's get into some other uses of servers. Trash collection.
You asked who has a NAS. I have
Yeah.
a NAS, and I'm embarrassed. We've had 2 NASs in the house, and we had a Lacey NAS, which we bought rather impulsively, but just as a way to back up family photos and software and machines and stuff. And we had that for a lot of years. But we finally got rid of it. It became unreliable. We actually cycled 2 sets or 3 sets of hard drives through it to expand it. It was a 5-bay NAS. However, most recently we have a free NAS Mini, bought at the suggestion of Carl Fife from Ixia Systems, who are the owners of the free NAS project. And I have to admit, I paid somebody to set it up for me because FreeNAS got to a point where it was more involved setting it up than I could do in a couple of hours because of all the minutia of ZFS and containers and all this kind of craziness. And it's massively capable little box. It's way overkill for what we need, but I still need to sit down. I probably have 8 to 12 hours of training to actually be able to figure out how to configure this box. And we don't do what you might do with it, because you can put things like a DLNA server on it and run it in a container there. And there were some things I wanted to put a Logitech media server on it for streaming music, but I just haven't got around to it yet.
You know, that's interesting you mentioned music, because I guess most people now don't stream their own music anyway. They use Spotify and all the other services, and they're just streaming online, right?
And that's where I kind of wanted to go. Do we still, and do we really need a NAS with all the problems that Michael had with drives that were failing, when we have unlimited broadband connectivity and downloads, and we can store everything on the cloud?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
That's the answer.
We'll stop.
We still need to have local NAS and data on site.
I am of an age that I like to have. I still buy CDs. I subscribe to streaming services. I particularly like Pandora. I've never actually tried Spotify. I subscribed to Tidal for a while because I like the idea of the losslessly compressed streams, but the user experience wasn't as good. So I like Spotify, or not Spotify, Pandora generally.
Sadly, Pandora is not serving anywhere outside the US for rights reasons. But yeah, briefly they did.
They're cheaper.
That's a good point. I just remember that when I first got my early iPods, I had to go through a VPN to get Spotify to work, or about Pandora, I mean, to work. Boy, there's so many services now. We're all getting all the names confused. Pandora is actually a unique service in that they've got these stations, and if you really like, I don't know, Stevie Ray Vaughan or something, or Bob Marley, you can get stuff that kind of sounds like Bob Marley. And as a musician, I'm not real hot on that, but I understand it, but it doesn't.
Well, and what I like about them is if you go to the effort of crafting a station, and it only takes a few minutes, to list 20 artists that you like, it will do the exploration for you. It will find things and suggest things that follow those themes, and it's pretty good about that. And I enjoy that, because that's the problem of not going to the record stores. You don't get exposed to stuff.
Discovery.
Things all the time, it's a problem, right? So that was good. But I do have 500 gigs of FLAC encoded music from CD that lives on a little server that because we've had I don't have one immediately available to me. We've had these Logitech squeeze boxes, streaming media players, and we have 6 of these. And then we have other devices like Raspberry Pis that emulate these. And so every place that we might want to listen to music, there is a little streaming device hooked up to usually some powered speakers. And in fact, if you look, which camera are we looking at? We're looking at that camera. If we do that, you will see up there between the magazine things, there's a little M audio speaker up on the upper deck, and there's another one on the other side, and there's a squeeze box. And they can play synchronized or they can play separately. And this all came about long before Sonos and much less expensively than Sonos.
Yep.
And so I like the fact that I'm not beholden to my broadband to have some music playing in the house. But on the other hand, I've really gotten used to, if we're having a bunch of people over, I don't take the time to sit and build a playlist. I just use Spotify or Pandora for that.
The other issue with that, Michael, which I totally understand, is that every time, I mean, there was just yet another, I hate iTunes. I think I'm not alone in that. And I do have a couple of iPod devices here, including one that's really, really, really old. It's like on iOS 4 or something. But anyway, point is that they keep going towards this model where they don't really care about what you have online. I mean, your music isn't your own anymore. So It's really important that if you do have a music collection that's digital, that it's right there and you don't have to mess around with declaring that, here's where it is. And so the streaming part, if you have a music collection, the streaming part's a little annoying, other than Pandora, which is totally separate. But
Amazon, have you used Amazon's streaming music service, which is part of Prime, although there's an upgrade to it? Because if you buy CDs on Amazon, they make available to you a digitized version even before the CD arrives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's an Amazon streaming app for your phone and whatnot. It's not integrated with this Logitech stuff, which kind of annoys me. But at the same time, it's duplicative anyway. So
Michael, are you, because you're before we move on to everybody else's network experience, I'm just curious. You have you have more than one Sonos speaker in the house?
I don't have any Sonos speakers.
Oh, I thought you did. I'm sorry. Okay. Does anybody?
No. We use these Logitech. I came close to buying one this week because they're on sale since a new generation with Amazon Alexa built into it. Hang on, I must turn her off.
Well, what I was going to ask about though is that they're getting more and more into the IoT aspect. So you guys have the old, Play Randy Rare album. I mean, that again is not something that's attractive to me, but people like it. To me, it's like really a toy to be talking to stuff, but that's just because I'm old, I guess.
Well, I'd argue that
it's
point.
A gimmick for me too.
I'd argue that point with you, but in our house, what we mostly use the Echoes for is controlling lighting, and it's like having a wireless remote. But it's not like an infrared remote because I can turn on the living room lights from here by voice command, right? Or something like that. And so let's say we hear hey, we live in Houston. We hear a gunshot, right? I'm in bed. I say, Alexa, turn on the house lights, and every lamp in the house comes up, right? I can turn on and off the yard lights, and that's principally what we use it for. But if you go back in time, we had a little bit of Z-Wave stuff. The Z-Wave stuff was never that sophisticated. We would have by the door in like a room, we'd have a little keypad, and you could go to the keypad and turn on and off lights, as opposed to going to lamp to lamp to lamp or what have you. And before the Z-Wave stuff, we had some X10 stuff, which was similar, but less sophisticated, certainly less reliable. And so what really happens is, if you've got Philips Hue or Lutron or any of these remote control light bulbs. Like, for example, if you look over my shoulder here, Alexa, turn on the office lights.
Dangerous demo.
Not dangerous at all. But so that's kind of what we do. Alexa, turn off the office lights. And that
Alexa, turn off the power. Hopefully that's not in there.
I'll tell you what happens though. I walk out into the backyard more often than not because we have speakers under the eaves in the backyard and on the front porch, and I really would like to have voice command of that because you get into the habit of it, and that's a first world problem if ever there was one. But and then you think, well, hang on, it would have to be authenticated to my voice and my wife's voice and not my neighbor's kid's voice.
Exactly. Yeah. That's inviting trouble, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is. And what we don't do though is we don't do like Bluetooth locks or anything like that. I think that's troubling. Anyhow, so we have found some utility in the Amazon Echo, but we don't use it for playing music because it's not a good.
Interesting. I don't know. The act of playing music, don't get me started. It's complicated, but basically, if you harken back to the days before all this stuff existed, picture someone going through their record albums. You see this on movies sometimes. Yeah. And it's always an indication of somebody who's old or old-fashioned, right? I'm watching a series now called Mr. Mercedes, by the way. And there's two interesting features in this. One is that they demonstrated how a Mercedes key could be the radio of the key opening, the key fob that opens the doors or unlocks the car can be intercepted and imitated, right? I don't know if any of you have a Mercedes. I don't even have a car at all, so I'm far from one. But the point is, anyway, there's that. And also, this guy, who is an older Irish detective, has 33 vinyl. So he goes and carefully selects the music. There's a huge difference to me between fondling the vinyl copies that you might have of the Stones or the Kinks or the classical music or whatever, and going, what is the Kinks song? Dedicated something of fashion.
Fashion, yeah.
What is it?
Dedicated follower of fashion.
Yeah. So Alexa, play Dedicated Follower of Fashion by the Kinks. I'm sorry, I don't know. Anyway, it just seems weird. Can you see what's
sitting over there? Can you see these?
There you go. Yes.
Yeah. And over there, maybe you can.
You probably got a Macintosh, don't you?
No.
Macintosh meaning
there's a complete deck with two record players, vinyl record players, and a mixer in the middle.
Oh, do you know, I haven't had one of those literally since my kids were 5, because when they were 5, they kept breaking all my styluses, my styli, and they were far too expensive. And I thought, all right, we'll just use CDs, and I got rid of the record player.
Right.
You know that I have, along these same lines, I have a USB cassette player.
Oh, I have a lovely story about cassettes.
Yeah?
Yeah, somebody locally, it was posted on one of our local message boards, a woman looking for a cassette player because she went for a tarot reading the day before, and it was about an hour long, and this woman got to the end of it, and the woman gave her a cassette. In 2017, she gave her a cassette.
Well, there are companies who will transfer it to you for you.
I suspect the woman's husband may well have done that task as well. Yeah.
My brother-in-law went and bought a USB turntable so he could digitize a bunch of vinyl that he had, and I that is so antithetical to the idea of vinyl being high quality, but because a $150 USB turntable is going to be margin.
Well, it may be just to preserve. The reason I bought the cassette player is because I have tons and tons. I have hundreds of cassettes, and some of them are original music or different bands I play with and stuff. So there's a need to try to preserve that because, as we all know, cassettes will eventually die. They'll eventually shrivel up and be useless. And a lot of them, was it 100?
They demagnetize. They suffer that bad.
Yeah, and also just the tape itself gets brittle. What were the large? Was it 180? What was the longest duration cassettes?
120, I think.
No, at least 180.
You can get 180s. But
so
but
the
they were
180s,
still.
the 180s are really thin, and they're the first to crap out. So you really got to be careful. And if you have anything valuable on cassette, you really want to do that. And I don't have any illusions about the quality of this stuff, but it's more or less just to witness what went down. The recordings were done on a Sony Walkman, mono Walkman anyway. So there's not like it's some big deal to preserve. The turntable, on the other hand, that you mentioned, yeah, that's a bit of a problem. If you've got records in mint condition, plus if you care about that stuff, you're some kind of an audiophile, and each cell, what do you call the pickup? The pickups there was a huge difference in pickups, and they were really expensive if they were good ones, and so on. So that's a whole other ball of wax for sure.
You know where that ended up, though? A lot of people don't know where that ended up. And they still argue about, Shure versus Ortofon versus Grado, all these different things, and
conic or elliptic styluses.
Yeah, and tracking for it, all this stuff. And but there was a company in Japan and they're still around, and they make a turntable that has a laser pickup. It doesn't use a stylus at all. It reads the groove with a laser, and basically does interferometry. And their turntable is $15,000-$20,000, but it doesn't. It's the only turntable that doesn't wear on the records. And so if you truly believe that the records are hi-fi, that is the way to do it. It's also not digital; it's analog.
Yeah.
So it's completely consistent philosophy, and I admire that. To your point about cassettes, Randy, before I moved to Texas, and I had hundreds of cassettes as you did, I culled the collection down to things that only really mattered, and I very painstakingly duped them all to mini disc. And we all know where mini disc went, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I enjoyed mini disc for a long time, but
and mini disc was not lossless either. It's compressed, right?
It was compressed, but it was a vastly superior compression scheme to MP3, which was the leader.
For sure.
Because
I've also got dozens of DATs, and some of them are masters of music, my music, and my DAT player. My DAT player died long ago. In fact, I'm kind of looking around for what used to be fairly expensive, the Tascam large, they're like rack-size players that are probably, if I went on eBay, they're probably trivially inexpensive now. But I would love to be able to convert some of this stuff over to what? To files, I guess, so.
You might appreciate this, Randy, that Studer last year, Revox, who is, I hate to say this, but is now a brand name owned by Samsung. Harman International was bought by Samsung last year. And it's funny because Samsung, they'll buy that entire family of companies, which included David's IMing me, included things like AKG and Studer Revox and Harman Kardon and JBL. I mean, these are foundational names in audiophilia and pro audio.
I had a Revox reel-to-reel, and of course I've recorded on Studers in studio for years.
Yeah, if you worked in broadcasting, Revox. It was especially the auto reverse Revox.
The Revox 15 IPS.
Yeah.
The Studer 800 series. Google that. They're things of beauty. They're fantastic of engineering.
Well, the other thing is that when you're mentioning 15 IPS because it was 7.5, 3 3/8 or whatever. You had a physical sense, those of us who are geeks, and I'm not a geek in the quality sense, but as far as just mathematics and electronics, you realized inherently that doubling the speed gave you better highs, right?
Absolutely.
So, that was it's just a funny side effect of that.
But at the expense of short running times, right?
Absolutely. So that's just funny that's the kind of stuff you needed to know.
Or you were doing some really long, intricate solos. You maybe couldn't run at 30 EPS because you didn't have enough time on the reel.
Well, we had that exact thing happen because those reels, which I think were like $200 each. Well, I'm talking about 2-inch now, so it's not really Revox, but the Studer, the 2-inch tape was very expensive. And of course, you had to buy Ampex or Ampeg, which is it? Ampex, right?
Ampex. Yeah.
Grandmaster 456 usually.
Ah, there it is. I used to have. I actually left those on the street. I'm embarrassed to say, because it was just so cumbersome when we last moved years ago. Yeah, man. Maybe the Chinese are putting out my masters now. I don't know. That'd be great if I learned that they were. But the point is, anyway, the very expensive tape. And one of the tunes that I recorded, the engineer said, you have about 3 minutes left. So if you're going to play something, it has to be under 3 minutes. So we did it. We managed it.
I'll tell you something interesting. I'm still an Audio Engineering Society member, and I track some online groups for such things just because it amuses me. And I really do. I enjoyed my time working in recording studios. There are some folks now who are doing albums, and they're doing things for effect. And so, for example, they have, say, an old Studer 2-track off, back there because it's a thing of beauty, and they spent so much money on it 25, 30 years ago that they can't be rid of it. But, and they're using it now the way you would use like a reverb or a delay. They'll literally, in the mastering process, they'll dub selected tracks onto the 2-track analog machine and back for the effect of what the analog recording does. Okay, that's interesting. And I kind of get that. It's like a tape delay or a mellotron or, something like that. But then I saw somebody doing that who was a younger engineer, and he was so happy because he bought a Sony 3324, which is a 24-track digital recorder, first generation 24-track Sony digital recorder. And he was using the digital recorder in exactly the same way. He was bumping tracks to the digital recorder. I'm like, that seems to me simply wrong. I mean, you might say that any effect that you desire is good, but it seems to me like the problem is he's working in a digital audio workstation, which has a certain sound, a kind of sterility to it. And then he's bouncing it to an early digital recorder with all of their flaws and coming back. I mean, I understand going out to the analog world and coming back. I don't understand going to that.
Well, the DA and AD converters add some kind of color to the music. That's exactly the kind of color you want. I know that there are artists that only want that brand and that device to record their music because it has the color of the sampling and downsampling and resampling that they want.
And I guess the part that I sort of instinctively understand is when you go to an analog recorder, what you're really getting is you're getting compression and time smear and things. There are quantifiable things that going to a magnetic analog recorder give you. Noise floor is one of them, by the way. You get noise. But I just thought it was interesting that they would be bouncing to a first-gen Sony recorder, who, by the way, the studios that had those things, they paid $250,000 for them when they were new. They were tremendously popular, and then 7 or 8 years later, they were discarded because the A to Ds and D to As were so bad.
That's the bad that was thought to be bad that now is looked after because is that kind of sound you want.
Yeah, it's a follower of that fashion, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Incidentally, I'm reading a book. I'm actually listening to an audiobook. It is Thomas Dolby's sort of autobiography.
Ooh.
And it's very amusing.
Yeah. He's been experimenting quite a lot with all kind of stuff in very many different senses, in many different ways.
Do you know how he made his living, though? How he actually made all of his money? He crafted the ringtone, the standard Nokia ringtone.
Yeah.
And got paid for every Nokia phone ever produced.
That guitar riff, yes.
I just pasted in IRC the Wikipedia. Hello, Dan Jenkins. Wikipedia article on the Big Hurt, which was with all this talk we're talking about, Michael. You may remember, anyone who's old enough, the song called "The Big Hurt," which was the first commercial use of flanging, and the flanging was done on a tape recorder, which is pretty much the process you're describing. Except
by
that
pressing on the flange.
Except it was the real.
Exactly.
So that's kind of interesting bit of history. And
if I could have a Cedar A820 in my office here. Hang on, I will show you guys this, because this is these things are fantastic. Sorry, we're going down memory lane. I just
that's okay.
love these things. Let's see here.
I'm not old enough to remember all these things, you know. I don't know where you get them from.
As we are veering a bit from the original scope of of today, has anyone experimented playing records wet? Old records to try
Well,
to
you on the Titanic or something?
No.
I've heard it. Not done it.
There's a trend of trying to extract the best sound possible from old, probably a little worn records, playing them with a decent stylus, probably a stylus different from one you were using before, but completely covered in water, in just a little layer of water.
So you basically fill the groove with water.
Yeah, because, well, the displacement and everything else removes the water. I've tried to play a couple of records that were a bit scratchy and a bit noisy, with a bit of pops and cracks. And with that trick, they were flawless, as if they were coming out of the sleeve for the first time. I could not believe that. Has anyone experimented with that?
No, that's a technique I've never heard of before.
Oh, there you go, gentlemen.
Ooh.
Oh, look at all those buttons and switches.
There was Computer A820. There was a time in my life when I would have given sort of an important bit of my anatomy to have one of those. And, that one went on eBay for 11,500 used, but they were like $150 or $200 new. Lovely devices, lovely.
Not to mention the tape and the cost of trying to get somebody to set it up and do all the cabling, because the cabling, is non-trivial stuff. You had to have somebody who knew what they were doing to get that. Otherwise, you got ground loops.
What replaces them now? What replaces all of that now is one strand of Ethernet.
Yeah,
they do it all on something called Dante, which is audio network transport. And one strand of Ethernet, and you can put 96 uncompressed audio streams over it easily.
Yeah, but then it's in the digital domain. You're no longer pure.
Well,
right?
Adults can debate that over strong drink.
Well, I'm not one of them, but we need to hear from Andy. Andy, do you have any servers running on your LAN? I know you run servers everywhere in the world, probably, but
well, yeah,
on the LAN.
What have I got running on the LAN at the moment? Not a huge amount. I have Avocados Vim. That. Oh,
really?
Yeah, I've got a couple actually.
Some kind of juicer that does vegetables.
No, it's one of these. It caused a ruction between the young Timothy and somebody else. The Vim bit. So I've got a couple of those which I've been playing with, but that's really about it. That and a few Raspberry Pis is the only thing that I put on my local network. I don't have a media server. I don't have anything that distributes music around the house. I don't have fancy speakers or anything like that.
How does the Offspring units listen to music?
Generally through headphones.
Headphones on
either
phone
on phone or PC, one of them. Yeah. Indeed, and Deezer seems to be flavour of the month around here, mainly because mobile phone data is not included for Deezer. Sorry, you don't get charged for it, so free transport for Deezer.
Right. Yeah, that's their main claim to fame, as far as I see their name very often in that context of it's this bundle with, I think maybe Orange is doing something with that. And
the Vim, all these little boxes, Vim and the like, are they functional equivalents of the Raspberry Pi? Like, if you have something that runs on a Pi, will it run on that generally, or are they?
If you can recompile it, yes. the Cardass Vim, you can run Android at least 7, and you can run Debian, Ubuntu, and you can run Windows, I think.
Why?
So that's a big attraction. Yeah,
well,
huge
I said
attraction.
you can. I didn't say you should.
I can tell you why, though. I can not Windows specifically, but I can see an application. I have a little digital signage project coming up that involves putting a bunch of 60 and 60-inch LCDs around a public space and driving it with something, right? Some visuals, data-driven visuals, and there's sort of 2 schools of thought on that. One is you can just sort of load, if it's a smart TV, you just load some stills on it, but then you have to go physically set them all up. But if you put them on a network, or if you connect them up to give each of these a Vim, you can make them basically streaming media endpoints, and you can send them live streams over the network. And anyhow, that's maybe something I'm more familiar with than a digital signage environment as a programming.
Well, I mean, during this discussion, I've been often looking at open source media servers, and there's one called Servio that I've not heard of before, which looks like it's quite useful for streaming media around your local network. And if you really want to pay the money, you can do it from anywhere. But why would you want to do that?
I also have good experience with something that was called, and I don't remember now the new name, Mini DLNA, completely open source, free, runs on any Linux variant, and probably also on Windows, probably. There are versions that you can download on SourceForge. Works decently well.
Dan Jenkins has mentioned MB. I wanted to mention before we close out, because we're getting up to the hour here. I actually have to go pretty soon. And Dan uses Plex. I have a thing, by the way, that for those of you who are interested in looking up, I don't even want to get into the details of this, but do a Google on Sonar, SONARR. See what that does and see if that does anything for you. But I wanted to mention Dan's conference for 2018. You can go to commcon.xyz, ComCon. Check that out. And yeah, Cody, we've mentioned, Michael and I were talking about that. There's so many things you can do with this stuff today, and you can put it on so many different platforms that it's almost a fascinating task in and of itself. However, I am interested in watching my own local files, and I've found the solution that I mentioned earlier, which you can see by going to the hardware, by going to vuc.me/box, BOX. You'll see that thing that I bought. There are many other iterations of that, and I don't know what province of China this thing comes from, but it works fine, and I really appreciate it. And it's $65, or 65 euros, or probably 65 pounds in the UK. Anyway, take a look at that. See if you're interested. Or do your Raspberry Pi or your whatever other thing you're going to do. We'll go around one more time and see if we've forgotten anything. I must run, and I hate to let this thing run if I'm not here, only because if I do the edit after, it'll be too much trouble. So unless we haven't covered anything, Andy, any future or ending comments at all?
Well, I've just had a quick look at MB, which is available for Windows, Linux, NAS devices, a Mac on Docker or FreeBSD. That covers most things.
No Android?
No, it doesn't say Android, interestingly.
Okay.
But there are TV apps for it. Android TV, Amazon Fire Stick, Shield, Apple TV, Chromecast, Roku, HTML5 support, smart TV.
Yeah, we didn't. By the way, we didn't mention Roku, and I had an experience of Roku because the place we stayed at for a month in California had a Roku box, and I think they had a relatively recent one, and the remote was atrocious. It really had a lot of lag to it and was very uncomfortable. But the Roku mostly assembled your HBO, Netflix, et cetera, subscriptions on one screen. And I was not impressed with it. How much does a Roku cost? Does anybody know? They're probably at least $100.
They're cheap, and they're worse than that. They're built into a lot of the lower end sets now.
So how much is it? I could look, but we're almost done.
Roku 4 HD and 4K UHD streaming media player, $98.
Oh, there you go. Ooh. That's 33 more than I paid for my whatever it's called. My no name X117 or whatever, 917 X19.
We haven't mentioned at all smart TVs that already have all these applications inside.
I do not want to ever touch any of them, but go ahead, Karan.
No.
You agree, maybe.
Just
I don't want a
smart
TV. No, I really don't want a smart TV. Oh, so Dan says, Plex just announced a Roku app. Let me get my head around that, though. Roku is a box that pulls all that stuff together. I don't think Roku does any local server either, as far as I know.
It's a streaming client.
It's just a streaming client, yeah. So a streaming client for $100, that should be like $15.
Yeah.
It's just an interface, in fact. Well, anyway, anybody love smart TVs?
If I go and buy a new TV, I'm immediately looking for the dumbest one I can find. Yeah. If I want to add any smartness to it, I want to add it. I don't want it to be there and me have to go through their ridiculous menus and this, that, and the other. Or they all think it's absolutely brilliant, and I don't.
Oh yeah.
The advantage, and Dan points this out, that the one thing smart TVs give you is they ball it all up in one place, and that has oftentimes an advantage if you need wife or spousal approval. But for example, in our case, we have such a history of using TiVo, and the wife knows how to run the TiVo, that TiVo has client apps built in for Hulu and Vudu and Netflix and all of that, and she can navigate through those, even if those are substandard experiences compared to a Roku. It's all
we have all that on the thing that I was talking about too. Dan mentions, and by the way, I should have mentioned this. I've heard of it, Couch Potato, which is the equivalent of Sonar on movies. Now, a little caveat here. These are apps that go look for stuff by torrents and NZBs and stuff like that. So you may want to check on the status of how your ISP feels about these, or how you feel about them ethically. Personally, I can tell you that I subscribe to HBO, I subscribe to Netflix, and many other services. So, you know, I do not feel ethically like I'm doing anything bad. I am paying the price that you pay for that content. So, but again, it just depends on local. It does depend heavily on your ISP, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
You do not want to go to these things lightly. If you're going to be doing this kind of experimentation, highly recommend a VPN. Just in passing, I have no commission or anything with these folks, but I've been with them for years. I do use Watopia, WITOPIA. They work well. They don't have any problem that I've seen, and you can pop up anywhere in the world pretty much with them. So you don't want to go naked, unprotected, into the realms of internet file sharing, though. Believe me.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Who was that?
That was a TED Talk. Well, Black Hat USA, actually, 2017. It was breaking the x86 ISA, which I keep meaning to watch. So I've left the tab up, and every time I click on it, it starts playing.
Great. Anybody else have anything before we go to the mature audiences only?
No, I'd say we covered most of it.
In our usual fashion,
so
in our usual fashion of absolutely no organization, we covered whatever anybody had on their minds, which I think is fine. I don't think.
So we've gone through the various devices this week. Is it content we're talking about next week?
We could. We don't really know what's going on. I would like to put out a call for the Matrix folks. We want to get them on. It's now riot.im.
I am.
Yeah. IMUR, right? Is there a UR? There should be.
Oh, yeah.
UR. IMUR. Get it? Okay.
I have a multiple disorder.
Yes. Lucy Fridays, Randy, Ben. But I guess, yeah, Ben is, I saw him on the Matrix. Well, this isn't really fodder for the public part. Anyway, next week we are looking forward to having a great guest. We just don't know who that person is yet. But hopefully we'll get somebody from Matrix or Riot.im. Andy, you must be connected in that level. You guys are on that. I mean, I'm on it too. I saw Ben on it earlier today, in fact. But I'm not on there daily. Are you and James? You're on that in a big way, aren't you?
No, not really.
Or you were back in the day.
We were when we were working for a different employer that was particularly interested in certain things.
The TFDAs, yeah.
Yes, we were doing much more with it. And in fact, I ran my own server for some considerable while, but I've actually stopped it because it changes so much all the time. You've just got to maintain it all the time, and it's an extra thing that I really don't want to have to do.
I'll try to put out the feelers for Matthew and Matthew Hutchison and anybody else. Actually, I did send him a thing, and I don't recall getting an answer. I've got to run. My taxes are due, so I must, yeah. The joys of yeah. Anyway, anything else? Have we forgotten anything before we go? Corrado's cocking his head.
No.
Andy's cocking his head.
If we've forgotten something, then we have definitely forgotten it now.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, at my age, speaking for myself as the dean of this organization, I forget a lot of things. Join us next week, Fridays on the VUC, 12 noon Eastern time. By the way, speaking of Eastern time, we're going to be changing daylight savings time. There will be a gap. Mind the gap. Okay?
2 weeks, isn't it?
Is it 2 weeks or 1 week that we change?
It's the last week in October, the last Sunday in October.
But they change at a different time than we do.
And the US change on the 2nd, so it might be this week.
Okay, I better look. Hey, maybe we're on the wrong time now. All right, anyway, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.